We have informational hearing members on House File 302. I just want to make sure that all of our members of the Capital Investment know that we'll take official action of this bill on Wednesday once it's posted in public. Chair Howard, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll try to be brief. I want to make sure we have time for our testifiers. But members, as we've kind of heard it with the previous presentation, this really is a build or break moment for our state with the housing crisis that we're facing. Over 500,000 Minnesotans are paying more for their housing than they can afford, over 30% of their income. Evictions are skyrocketing, homelessness is increasing, and we have this massive supply-demand mismatch, especially for homes for our most low-income Minnesotans. And to put this in numbers, right now, there are, for our extremely low-income folks, we have over 100,000 unit gap in terms of homes that are available. And this supply-demand mismatch, more than any other thing, there are many challenges, but that is really what I believe the main driver when you see the rise in homelessness, the rise in family homelessness, the rise in evictions. We need to be building more housing. And meanwhile, last year, the legislature really put up a goose egg when it came to investments in housing. But we have an opportunity to create a different path forward, to unclog the pipeline and then some, and that's what this proposal, House File 302, will do by proposing $1 billion in bonding, $750 million in housing infrastructure bonds, as well as $250 million in general obligations bonds. And a few words, especially about housing infrastructure bonds, and reflecting on Representative Petersburg's comments about how we need to be looking not just at rental housing, but at home ownership. And it's so true. We need to be in yes and mode when it comes to addressing our housing crisis. And housing infrastructure bonds is a yes and tool. This is a resource that can be utilized to build rental housing. It can be utilized to develop manufactured homes. It can be utilized to build affordable home ownerships. It's one of our most flexible tools, one that has been bipartisan in the past, and truly meet a gap that exists to get thousands of units of homes and units online. As the commissioner said, every time we have a round of housing infrastructure bonds, they're basically unable to fund, 3 out of 4 projects that are ready to put shovels in the ground. And so we have an opportunity this year to create a different path and get more shovels in the ground. And the ripple benefits of doing that are just hard to overstate when you think about how foundational an affordable home is to everything in your life. Being able to deploy these resources is going to build a stronger economic future, better educational outcomes for our kids, better health outcomes for families. All will improve if we're able to make these kinds of investments through housing infrastructure bonds and general obligation bonds for public housing. So I say build, baby, build. And that's what this bill will do. And with that, I'll turn it over to my testifiers.
Thank you, Chair Howard. So first up, we have Kelly Law. Please identify yourself and proceed.
Chair Lee, Chair Howard, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all today. My name is Kelly Law, and I'm a policy and field building advisor with the Metropolitan Consortium of Community Developers, or MCCD. MCCD is an association of 50 nonprofit organizations committed to expanding the wealth and resources of communities through housing opportunities and economic development initiatives. MCCD and its members dedicate our time and resources to address...
Kelly, can I have you speak closer to the microphone, please? Thank you.
Yes, sorry about that. To address the housing crisis across the continuum of housing needs. Our members are both multifamily and single-family affordable housing developers. They provide homebuyer services, they work in community, and they work to ensure that everyone in Minnesota has a place to call home. With our partners, members, and the Homes for All Coalition, we are asking you to support the $1 billion request in bonds for housing this session. The lack of affordable housing options is at the core of Minnesota's complex housing crisis. Simply put, there is not enough housing in Minnesota. Minnesota is also losing its affordable housing stocks at alarming rates, and new construction has struggled to keep up with the increasing need for affordable housing options. We need more than 4,500 units annually of deeply affordable housing at or below 50% AMI. However, we currently only build 550. As the supply of housing is decreasing, the cost of housing is increasing. Families cannot afford to remain stably housed when 30, 40, 50, and 60% of their household income is drained by their housing costs. In 2021 alone, MCCD members created or preserved over 250 affordable home ownership opportunities and helped more than 6,100 households with home buyer services. To date, MCCD members have created or preserved more than 28,592 permanently affordable rental homes in Minnesota. We also know that MCCD's membership collectively serves primarily BIPOC renters and homeowners at far greater rates than the private market. Of the rental and homebuyer households assisted by our members, 73% identify as BIPOC. The consortium has proven that its shared work to lower racial disparity gaps for cost-burdened renters, in homeownership rates, and access to capital is working, but without continued resources from the state, this work is in danger of coming to a halt. We recently conducted an affordable housing pipeline survey to better understand just how many affordable housing projects are waiting in the pipeline. We know that 50% of our members have more than 22,360 units of multifamily housing, 350 units of homeownership, and 935 units of housing co-ops that are ready for development right now. With additional funding from the state, these housing projects will move out of the pipeline and into units that will house those most affected by the housing crisis. I cannot stress enough the importance of passing this bill. Housing infrastructure bonds are some of the most flexible state sources of funding to develop and preserve affordable housing in Minnesota. Since 2012, as Commissioner Ho stated earlier, housing infrastructure bonds have created or preserved over 6,000 units of housing, indicating the huge impact that an additional $1 billion in bonds for housing will have on the housing needs of the state. Additionally, by authorizing half of the housing infrastructure bonds for 2023 and half for 2024, we can create a more predictable and consistent pipeline of funding for current and future housing projects. By passing House File 302 and securing $1 billion in bonds for housing, we can begin to address the lack of affordable housing across the state of Minnesota. The time is now for transformative investments in housing. We know that happy, healthy, and stable lives start with home. Thank you, Chair Howard, for carrying the bill, and thank you to Chair Lee and the members of the committees for the opportunity to testify before you today.
Thank you for your testimony. Next up, we have Linda Stage. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the record and proceed.
My name is Linda Stage. Chair Howard and Chair Lee and members of the committees, thank you for allowing me to testify today. I'm here today as a representative of AON and have been asked to speak about the importance of passing House File 302 this year. In 1996, I went through a very difficult divorce. It had been an abusive relationship, and my husband took everything. He took my retirement, he took my savings, and when that happened, I could no longer afford the rent on my home. I had worked my entire life as a registered nurse and a nursing instructor, helping to educate members of my community to be caregivers. But when my husband left, that all changed. I began to search for other housing options as soon as I realized I was going to lose my home. I called shelters that told me that I would have to sleep on the floor, but I knew that as a senior woman, my body just wouldn't tolerate that. I'd probably be on the floor the whole time. And I called housing agencies throughout the area, and they were full. Most of them didn't even have a waiting list, but those that did, the waiting list was approximately 2 years. So I had no choice but to live out of my car. I was lucky, though, it was summer, so I didn't have to deal with the cold of the Minnesota winter. But knowing that a change in season was coming, I was motivated to continue my search for housing options. And through the grapevine, an employee at AON found out that I was homeless and worked with me to get me an apartment. And once I was in an apartment that I could afford, everything changed. Since then, I have had the opportunity to grow. For the first time in my life, I can say that I have friends. And I'm giving back to my community too. I've helped organize a food shelf. I've worked on voter registration and on the census in 2020. I also worked as an election judge in my community last November. My home makes it easier for me to manage my health too. I have a refrigerator where I can store my insulin, and I have an address where my medication can be sent. And best of all, for me, I have a place for my grandchildren to come and visit me, a place where I know they're safe and where I can host them. I've had the opportunity to get excited about my life again. As a senior, my journey may not look like the face of homelessness, but here I am. I'm only one person out of a growing number of seniors facing homelessness. House File 302 would help Aon build more homes for seniors like me. Programs like these are needed because they help people like me to get help in our communities. And thinking back on the difficulties that I've had finding a place, the most wonderful feeling is to know that other people won't have to go through what I did. I ask you to support and pass House File 302 this year. It is very needed and would help create more housing for thousands of people struggling to maintain or find affordable housing. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon.
Thank you, Linda, for sharing your story with us. Next on the agenda, we have Courtney Bailey. Welcome. Please identify yourself and proceed.
Thank you. Chair Howard, Chair Lee, members of the committee, my name is Courtney Bailey. I'm here also as a resident of Aon, and I've been asked to demonstrate the importance of House File 302. Sorry, forgive me, I'm a little nervous this morning. Well, I'm living proof of how important it is to have affordable housing to thrive. I work as a nursing assistant. I'm a mother of 3 special needs children. And like many others, I've experienced quite a bit before I was involved with Aon. I have tremendous illness. I have been jobless. I've been evicted, and I've been homeless. I moved in from another state. We live in a state that has just recently cleared a homeless encampment. The very state that motto is Minnesota Nice. This act of inhumanity is a small example of the lack of compassion in the housing industry. I myself come from a hardworking family. Both of my parents are medical professionals. My father was a paramedic. My mother was a medical assistant, and combined together of 60 years of service to the public, which in turn inspired me to be a medical assistant and later on go to school to become a nurse. Unfortunately, I couldn't afford it, so I had to take a job as a factory worker. That's where I met my then husband, and we lived a very modest life. I became pregnant, and in an instant, we both lost our jobs. So we had some friends here in the Twin Cities and told us that Twin Cities, Minnesota is an excellent state, it's thriving, warm. So we scraped up what little dollars we had from friends and family members, and we took the 16-hour ride to come here to start our new lives. In the beginning, it was very tough. We had to live in a shelter. Shortly after coming here, I found that I was actually 2 months pregnant with my second child. Commuting back and forward on a bus was difficult. Living in a shelter was even more degrading, to the point where one night, as I sneezed, my water broke. Had to stay inside of a hotel room for a time being. Eventually, we found a little housing apartment. We didn't have much, but we had each other. Later on, shortly after our third child was born, my husband left me. So here I was, one person with 3 small children with 1 income. And business being business, my landlord evicted me with a 1-month-old baby. So I had to bite the bullet and returned back to work. Some friends and family got together and watched my children while I worked 60 hours a week until I was able to find a place to live, which was through Aon. The moment when I was able to get keys put into my hand and my sons were able to run upstairs to their bedroom, their own room where they can play, was the most heartwarming and satisfying experience. An experience that mostly anybody deserves. They hear the joy of my sons when they say, "This is our house." But just because I have a home now doesn't mean it's forever. Like many other Minnesotans, we teeter a line of which one paycheck keeps us away from poverty. That type of exhaustion, that type of stress is unbearable at times. So I'm here to ask the committee, my fellow Minnesotans, the individuals that showed me that we can come together as a community with love and respect and compassion for others, to have this bill to be signed, that we can have affordable housing, that mothers like me can walk into our doors with our children in just a sigh of relief, that our seniors who have done so much in our community can go home and relax after they've done so much. Our blue collars, our white collars, our everyday workers, we need this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Courtney, for sharing your experience with us. Next on the agenda, we have Mandy Pant. Please, welcome to the committee. Identify yourself and proceed.
Chair Lee, Chair Howard, I am Mandy Pant, and I'm sorry, members of the committees. My name is Mandy Pant. I'm a senior project manager with Project for Pride in Living, or PPL, and also serve as PPL's policy committee's co-chair. For over 50 years, PPL has worked to build hope, assets, and self-reliance of individuals and families who have lower incomes by providing transformative affordable housing and career readiness services. We own and manage close to 1,600 units of affordable housing in the core cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, as well as several western suburbs. Close to 3,500 folks live with us every night, nearly half of them children. Half of our units are considered supportive housing, which means people living in them are making 30% of area median income or less, which translates to about $20,000 a year, and are likely coming out of the region's shelter systems. I have worked in the housing development team at PPL for over 9 years and manage affordable housing projects in all its facets. This ranges from feasibility studies, funding applications, design, financial closing, and construction management. I've also been engaging more and more with the state and local housing policy and advocacy work, as policy can often determine how fast a project gets built, or even if it gets built at all, and impacting the local communities. We at PPL are very grateful for your work to increase our housing inventory through production and financing tools. Housing infrastructure bonds have been a critical resource that is essential to make new homes a reality in our state. One of my most recent projects was Anishinaabe 3 in partnership with the American Indian CDC, built on Franklin Avenue in Minneapolis. It completed construction last winter and serves 40 individuals coming out of homelessness and with substance use disorders. PPL's latest development is Bloom Lake Flats on the Lake Street corridor in South Minneapolis. Includes 42 units of supportive housing serving households and individuals where at least one member of the household is living with HIV and has experienced a housing instability. Both these projects were funded by housing infrastructure bonds and serve critical needs populations. Without HIBs, these may not have been built. The present investment, however, hasn't kept up with demand. Recent estimates suggest Minnesota will need to increase housing production by over 10,000 units a year, and approximately half of those will need to be affordable to address current demand. Without that increase in production, more and more households will struggle to maintain and gain housing stability. These struggles can be prevented with a commitment to more bonds that seed these types of housing developments. As the need for affordable housing solutions grow, so too does our work. However, a recent growth in key cost drivers, most notably in our property taxes, insurance, utilities, and security, is making it increasingly difficult to operate affordable housing. That's been a growing problem for several years, but the last 3 years of the pandemic have markedly accelerated these losses. We need to preserve the dignity of our residents and ensure our ability to continue to provide quality affordable housing for our communities across the region. The request before you matches the need. Significant investments in the preservation and development of housing are the only ways to truly address the housing crisis in our state. By passing House File 302 and fully funding bonds for housing, we can begin to meet these needs for all communities that call Minnesota home. At PPL, we firmly believe that housing isn't a roof, it's a floor. It's a foundation to building a better life for individuals and families. And as has been mentioned before, we know that families who are in stable housing, their health gets better, their children do better, and they develop their education and job skills. Before I close, I'd like to thank Representative Howard and all co-authors for carrying this bill. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm happy to answer any questions now or in the future.
Thank you for your testimony. Next up, we have Director Melissa Taphorn. Please identify for yourself for the record and proceed.
Good afternoon, Chair Howard and Chair Lee and committee members. My name is Melissa Taphorn. I am the Executive Director of the Washington County Community Development Agency, and currently I serve as the Legislative Chair for Minnesota NARO, which is the Minnesota chapter of the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, and that is why we use acronyms a lot in our work. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. Because this is the first presentation that Minnesota NARO has made to either committee, we want to talk about our agency, just our organization a little bit, and the role of housing authorities before we talk about public housing and the impact of the general obligation bonds on public housing. So, all right. And then I'm going to use the term housing authority generically throughout the presentation. However, in your community, our organizations might be branded as CDAs, Community Development Agencies, PHAs, Public Housing Agencies, or HRAs, Housing and Redevelopment Authorities. And on the list of testifiers that included myself and Jill Bankston, unfortunately, Jill is ill today and unable to join us, so you'll just be hearing from me. However, I have Shannon Guernsey, our Executive Director of Minnesota NARO, with me to answer any questions. Minnesota NARO is a membership organization for housing authorities and their employees. We provide education and training opportunities for our individual and agency members. And as a group, we really strive to promote strong and vibrant and viable communities throughout Minnesota. Housing authorities are local government entities that may serve a city, a county, or a group of counties. We're empowered by state statute 469 to provide housing, to redevelop blight, and to provide funds and subsidies to expand and rehabilitate housing. So kind of think of us as Minnesota housing on a local level. However, we do a little bit more depending on what our needs are. Each housing authority applies these powers in different ways to meet the unique needs and plans of their jurisdiction. Housing authorities act as developers, landlords, lenders, funders, and planners. We offer a wide variety of programming and invest in our local housing and redevelopment in our communities. I've had the honor and joy of working in a number of your districts, actually, over my career. I've worked for the cities of Richfield, Plymouth, and Dakota and Washington counties. And as you can imagine, even in those suburban areas, our needs are really different. If you think about those communities, and you can see how South St. Paul might focus on redeveloping their stockyards to make better use of those, that viable land along Mississippi River. Richfield acquires and clears blighted homes and offers the lots for resale to diversify their housing stock, which was pretty much primarily built all at the same time. And Plymouth and Woodbury offer down payment assistance programs to ensure the accessibility of lower income and modest income home buyers in their high cost markets. But what I want to say is housing authorities have incredible tools. We have successful programs. We sometimes just don't have all the resources we need to meet the needs. And I would invite you to take a look a little bit more at our handout to explain more about housing authorities, and also to reach out to your local housing authority, if you haven't already done so. And then I'd like to use this visual to help explain where housing authorities land in the housing spectrum or continuum. Housing authorities can and do have a hand in everything from ending homelessness to home ownership. And our largest and well-recognized programs, however, fall into the darkest blue box there, labeled assisted housing, and those are the federal housing choice voucher program, or sometimes called Section 8, and public housing programs. In our communities, our units usually have the lowest and most affordable rents. And public housing is a critical piece of that housing continuum, providing homes to our most vulnerable community members, our seniors, children, veterans, and people with disabilities. Public housing is a vital part of our communities, a valuable asset and property that is often the pride of residents and policymakers alike. You can see on the map, public housing is located throughout our entire state. It is home to 20,000 households and 36,000 Minnesotan individuals. Public housing is owned and operated by 117 different housing authorities. Our apartments vary tremendously in number and size, with more buildings and larger properties in the cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis. Rural housing authorities frequently have fewer units in a single building, and more than 75% of Minnesota's public housing buildings have 100 units or less, and 50% have less than 50 units per building. Approximately 5% of all Minnesotan residents or renters reside in public housing. The majority of our residents are individuals over 62 years of age, so Commissioner Ho will be happy to know that the federal definition of senior is a little higher, or have physical and mental illness or disability. Average income is $16,700 per year. That's about 22% of the state median income. So it's really on the really low end. Public housing provides that stable housing for those that face the highest barriers. And as you can imagine, there is great demand. We heard one of the testifiers attest to that in her own personal experience. And we haven't been able to build any new additional public housing. There has not been federal dollars for that since at least the 1990s. Right? And this is how this works. So a public housing resident pays 30% of their income towards the rent, and then HUD pays us up to a maximum in two different funds. One, an operating fund to pay for staff and operations, and second, a capital fund to pay for maintenance and upkeep of the physical building. We aren't allowed to commingle those funds in any way. And on average, in Minnesota, we collect $635 per unit per month in rent. The resident pays on average $334, and HUD pays us $301. And then on the capital fund, we receive an average of $217 per month. And for context, most monthly family lenders require replacement reserve deposits per month of $350 to $500. So just emphasizing how we're greatly underfunded there. And then years of declines have created backlog in community or capital improvement needs. A survey conducted in 2019 of a subset of our Minnesota housing authorities showed that there was $187.7 million in immediate critical needs And then based on those survey responses, the consultant extrapolated that there was an additional amount that totals just under $355 million. Those were critical immediate needs in 2019. The survey showed that an additional $450 million would be needed by 2029. Unlike other residential property, housing authorities cannot borrow to make these repairs. Public housing prohibits securing other debt on that property. And these numbers just, again, were 2019, so this does not take into account the variation in pricing, and we're seeing about 30% increase in construction costs. Right? In order to pay for rehabilitating public housing, we can follow a couple different paths. HUD provides a couple different paths to what's called repositioning your public housing. Basically, we circumvent the underfunding of public housing by changing it to a Section 8 funding platform. Residents continue to pay income or rents based on their income, and the housing authority can collect an equal or higher amount from HUD, and then they can borrow to make those necessary repairs. This is a complicated process and can be very beneficial to the property, not all of them, but in many cases it is. And we've been very fortunate that the Minnesota legislature recognized this issue, the underfunding, and in certain years authorized the issuance of general obligation bonds to fund the publicly owned housing program, or POP program. Funds are provided to Minnesota Housing, and then they are lent to housing authorities in the form of a 20-year deferred forgivable loan. This has been run through HUD and is one way that we can borrow on the properties. Housing authorities couple that POP funds with their capital funds and local equity, if available, and the repositioning options, however, don't blend well with the POP. We can't do both for the most part. Commissioner Ho shared a couple of POP loan examples, and I'd like to share two more. Our first example is in my agency. Whispering Pines is a 40-unit building in Forest Lake. The Forest Lake HRA built this 4-story building in 1971 to meet the needs of low-income seniors and people with disabilities. This happened to be the only asset or program that the Forest Lake HRA ran. And as federal funds began to decline and the property no longer was sustainable, the Forest Lake HRA dissolved and returned the building to HUD, where we stepped in. And we, as soon as we took over ownership or went in to do an inspection, we found a number of deficiencies. The roof was failing and causing water infiltration. The brickwork and parapet was structurally unsound. The backup generator, roof ventilators, and elevators were out of compliance with building codes, and the interiors had never been updated. The price to fix all of this was just over $1 million. When the building was transferred, there was a balance of 3 years of the capital funds, and it totaled $150,000. We approached Minnesota Housing and leveraged their funds with another $474,000 of our local levy funds, which at the time was about 15% of our annual levy, and a significant investment on our part for one property. However, we were in a much better position to do this than the Forest Lake HRA and many of our rural housing authorities, which do not have those other revenue sources. 5 years later, we took out a second POP loan to make necessary improvements to the plumbing and mechanical systems. We leveraged $288,000 in POP funds with $96,000 of our own capital funds. In the past year, we've made $166,000 of improvements to the community room and kitchen, including accessibility improvements, and those were fully funded by our capital fund. Whispering Pines is now in a position to be able to absorb our 5- and 10-year capital improvements plan within the allocated capital fund that we receive from HUD. And then our second example is located in Wilmer, and Lakeview is an 8-story apartment building housing 127 households and is over 50 years old as well. Prior to applying for their first allocation of POP funds in 2014, very few capital improvements had been completed in the building. Candy-Ojai County HRA has been fortunate to be the recipient of 3 Minnesota Housing Finance Agency POP awards for Lakeview Apartments. General obligation bonds were crucial in allowing them to complete each project. General obligation bonds allowed them to efficiently use limited federal dollars to preserve and provide decent housing to their lower-income seniors, disabled members, and families. Candy-Ojai County HRA leveraged each dollar of POP funds with $1.15 of their local HRA funds. And their first project was to address the failing plumbing system and address health and safety issues for fire safety, asbestos abatement, and ADA compliance. There was a leak in the building. All water in the entire building had to be drained to fix the leak because there was no way to isolate the plumbing risers or stacks. The project replaced all building copper water supply lines, galvanized waste piping, and system isolation valves. In addition, compromised fire protection was replaced. There is no floor-to-floor fire protection inside the shaft wall. All the pipes were insulated and fire-caulked. Fire-rated metal access panels were installed so plumbing valves can be accessed while still retaining that firewall rating. Asbestos was abated, and then the accessibility features were made compliant with the ADA criteria. This allowed a wheelchair-bound community member who was living in a motel for a year to move into one of the handicap-accessible units. The project was completed under budget, and in this case, an added outcome was the reduction of water use in the building. Before undertaking the project, the building used 12 million gallons of water a year, and that was reduced in 4 years to 5.5 million.
Director, can I have you wrapped up?
Yes, and then, so there's a number of other things, and I know you have the presentation in front of you on Candy-Ojai. So I would just emphasize that $6.5 million in general obligation bonds has been very important to our housing authorities, and most importantly has been given our residents a sense of pride. And we would just express our support for House File 302. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Members' questions, let's be succinct, because we're going a little bit over time now. Representative Carroll.
Thank you, Chair. This question is for Chair Howard. And let me first say by letting you know how much I appreciate your leadership and dedication to this issue. You've been an outstanding example to those of us who are coming in from municipal positions. So with that said, in subdivision 2, you reference 50% AMI for your threshold. I dealt with that in city council days in Plymouth, where if people wanted TIF, we would require that they set aside so much for affordable housing. Usually 20%, depends. I would try to get 30 or 40, and I'd get a lot of pushback to 50. What is it about 50 versus 30 or 40? I think I know the answer, but I want to hear why it is you have it in your legislation at 50.
Chair Howard.
Mr. Chair, Representative Carroll, so by this would be a policy change piece that will end up covering more so when it's in the housing committee, but you're not on our housing committee. So just to share a little bit, this change really reflects the desire to target resources to a population that right now we aren't able to deploy housing infrastructure bonds to meet this huge need at that 50% AMI or below. We definitely need to be targeting resources for folks 30% and below as well. But this change, and especially if we're able to pass a significant amount of resources, would allow us to kind of do both.
Thank you, Chair Howard. Representative Carroll, we will have an opportunity on Wednesday to ask more questions of the chair too when he presents
Thank you.
formally. Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just quickly wondering how this bill is going to travel. I understand we're back again Wednesday. Is this going to be an omnibus bill in housing or capital investment? Is it going standalone? Do you have any idea what's going to happen?
Thank you for the question, Representative Erdahl. So housing infrastructure bond is under the jurisdiction. The account is under the housing committee. And so our intent is to take out the public housing piece on Wednesday and move the housing infrastructure bond piece to the housing finance committee, and then Chair Howard can decide how he wants to proceed with that. And so the intent is to keep public housing within bonding so that the bill doesn't become a bonding bill over there in housing.
Thank you.